Hi everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to make a loaded baked potato soup with some roast beef and cheddar melts on our homemade sourdough wheat bread that we made last night. And then we're going to whip up a batch of homemade brown sugar cinnamon Pop-Tarts. So let's start by getting our bacon kind of cooked up for our soup here. We're going to cook it up and then we'll saute our veggies in the bacon grease and we'll reserve our bacon to like crumble over the soup. But we don't need a full pound, just a half pound here. So I've got my kitchen shears and I'm just going to snip my bacon into the pot here. I find this is just the best way to make your own like bacon bits. Instead of trying to like chop it up on a cutting board, kitchen shears just work wonder for this. And then we'll let this start to cook up and then we'll work on our homemade Pop-Tarts, which I feel like are having like an it moment right now. I see lots of Pop-Tarts everywhere. And so I was like, yeah, do that. I had some leftover, butter crust dough. So I was like, I can definitely whip some up. I always feel like, I feel like growing up in the 90s, everybody had Pop-Tarts at some point in time. Although I really think about them and I'm like, these are not breakfast foods in the least. They're desserts, but that's what we lived off of. I always remember one of my friends every day, they either had the strawberry Pop-Tarts or they had a Hot Pocket for breakfast. Okay, we've got our bacon here chopped up. Just going to do a couple little more snips. Give my hands a quick rinse now. And I'm going to turn on, and we're going to just start cooking this over, like a 6, so like a medium high. And I'll get a spatula out for when we're ready to start stirring it. But while we're waiting for that, let's mix up our filling to go inside our Pop-Tarts, and then we will roll out our dough. So we're going to actually keep it pretty simple here. The inside is just brown sugar, cinnamon, and a little bit of flour. And then I'll make a delicious brown sugar glaze. Pretty much the same glaze I made yesterday for our pumpkin scones. But we're going to start off with about a half a cup of brown sugar here. Here we go. And then we're just going to add in a tablespoon of flour. And this is just to make a little bit of a base, inside, give it a little bit more substance. And then 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. And we'll just mix it together, and that's really just the simple inside filling to them. So 1, 2. Now I'm going to get a spoon and mix it up, and then we'll start rolling these guys out. Okay, so just make sure that flour gets mixed well into your brown sugar and all those ingredients kind of mixed up together. There we go. Okay, and now we're going to roll out our crust, which this is just a homemade butter pie crust in here. And so this is just full of, I made pot pies. So I popped some in the freezer because I wasn't going to use all of it up. So I defrosted it. But when I made this, I made so much of it. But for like a 2 kind of piece pie crust, it uses about 2 sticks of butter, flour, salt, and water. It's really, really simple for it. I don't put any sugar in it so that you can use it for both savory and sweet things to it. I'm going to put this between 2 parchment pieces of paper. And now you want to keep your pie crust cold until you're ready to roll it out, because that cold, it's going to give you those flaky layers, which is going to give you a bit of a workout when you get to the rolling part, but it's going to be worth it for those nice and flaky layers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll this out into a big rectangle, but I'm not going to do, I feel like right now you've seen those like sheet pan Pop-Tarts. I'm not going to do one. I'm just going to do individual. So we'll cut them into little mini rectangles here. But we'll get the top, or we'll get them rolled out. And then what we're going to do is we're going to brush them with a little bit of egg wash in between so that they'll seal together, and put our filling in, and then we'll seal up around the edges with a fork and prick them a little bit so that we have it. But I do find the best way to get this rolling is you just put it between two pieces of parchment paper. That way, when you need to transfer it, it will be nice and easy, and you can really get going. And this is where you've got to really get our workout in. I always say whenever I make homemade pie crusts or almond pastry or anything that uses a crust base, it's like such a good arm workout today. Okay, let's take a quick pause because we're going to give our bacon over here a little bit of a stir because I can hear it starting to sizzle. There we go. Okay, we're going to let that continue. Get our first kind of next one out. And I will say the second one will be a little bit easier because it will have cooled off even, or warmed up a little bit. But you don't want to do, like if you're going to make it right away, you still need to chill your dough in the fridge for 30 minutes before you roll it out, because you don't want to have like a warm pastry crust, because then you're not going to get flaky layers. You're just going to get like a hard kind of dense crust. And we're going to roll it out pretty thin because you don't want it to be super thick. Here we go. We're getting there. Now, I've also seen it where you just roll it out, you cut out a big circle, and then you make like a big, almost like a pie shape Pop-Tart for it. But I think you've got to do the cute little old school ones, you know, just like that popped out of the toaster. Okay. Now I always like to flip it over a little bit. Kind of moves a little bit better. There we go. Now, I know like you can get these pastry mats, and I have one, never use it because I just prefer the parchment paper. Let's see how this is looking for thickness wise. We're getting pretty close there. And then we'll cut these and then roll whatever we need to. Here we go. Okay. And I think we've got a good base on this first one here. So we're going to move this off. I'll set this right over here. And then I'm going to kind of cut my dough to be as uniform as I possibly can. But again, I don't want to get rid of all of my hard work. We'll do a little bit of a patching Frankenstein to try to make it as square-like. It doesn't have to be a perfect one. You know what I mean? I always say, don't waste a lot of your hard work if it's not 100% perfect. You don't have to cut off and then have to do even more rolling. Just a little extra Frankenstein. Okay. That should be fairly close here to having it. We'll save those. We'll add them into our next one. I'm going to give it now. Once I've got it kind of squared off, we'll do one final roll over. Here we go. And now we're going to cut these into our Pop-Tarts. And I think I can do, we're going to do 9. So I'm going to cut this one in here, or you know, we'll probably just do 6. That way they're not super small. Pretty even. Let's get our bacon stirring over here real quick. You don't want it to get too burnt. But again, we want it to crisp up just a little bit and nicely here. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to transfer this onto our baking sheet over here. And we'll do all of our sealing up, but we want to make sure we get them on here because we're going to need this space. So you're just going to pick it up. And here we go. Make sure I leave enough space on here. Here we go. And this is going to be for our base of our kind of little Pop-Tarts here. I'll slide this over here. Before we put our filling on it, and then we'll roll out our top here, we're going to brush it with some egg mixture. Let me slide this right here. I've got 1 egg. And then I'm going to add in a splash of cream. I'll steal a little stir while we're walking by. I'm going to turn this down now to about a 3. Just about, I want to say like a tablespoon of cream. You could also use milk. I already had my cream out in here. And we're going to whisk this together with our fork. And then we'll brush this on. And this is going to hold our 2 kind of layers together. And it's also going to add a little bit of moisture to our, like our base, our filling. Okay. This should be nice. We're going to brush each one, a nice kind of coating over the top of this. And this is going to be the glue that is going to help hold these together. We will also be sealing up the edges, but you want to make sure you've got this base in here. Here we go. So we've got that down. Now we're going to add in our filling. Now with your filling, you have to be careful. You don't want to push it out to the edge. So you're essentially going to make this little pile in the middle of it, but you're going to leave your edges to the side because we are going to, you know, be using a fork to put those together. And if you put the filling all the way out to the side, what will happen is it will start to seep out, and we don't want that. So this is our cinnamon, brown sugar, and flour mixture, and this is going to be the base for our brown sugar and cinnamon Pop-Tarts. Here we go. And then we'll roll out the top, and then we'll just do our seal around the edges. And these go in the oven to bake, and then we'll make our glaze. But in the process, we'll have our lovely soup making. We're probably going to just take a quick pause on these for a second and check on our bacon and add in our onions and whatnot. Okay. These are starting to crisp up nicely. So I don't want to take them out until they're nice and crispy because, again, we're going to use that bacon grease to really flavor up our soup. But we don't want them to be chewy. So I'm going to lay that down, let those crisp up. And then I'm just going to prep my onion right now so that when we're ready to dump it in, like take out the bacon bits, we can just dump it in. So I'm just using 1 yellow onion. And I'm just going to dice this up because we'll want to saute and caramelize it. Because this soup is going to be, I'm going to puree half of it, and then I'm going to leave part of it, some potato chunks in there, because I do love the texture of the potato chunks, but I do want a nice kind of creamy base. So it's going to be like a half and half, because we want that texture, but also that richness for it. And that's going to be for our loaded baked potato soup. So I've got my onions nice and ready here. So when my bacon bits are all nice and crispy, then we can transfer them out and throw those into saute. Okay, I'll leave them right there. Let's wash a little bit of this onion off. And I'm just gonna slide this right over here so I have my workspace for our next little batch. And this one should roll out a little bit easier because this dough is not quite as cold as that first round. I already lost a piece of dough. There we go. So.
You have a question. What type of dough is this?
So this is just my butter pie crust dough. So it's simple. It's just made with flour, butter, cold water, and a little bit of salt. Now, when I made this up the other day, because I froze this part down and de-thawed it, but I made a whole bunch of it at a time, just do the work once. But I used, 2 pounds of butter, 8 cups of flour, and like 4 teaspoons of salt in it, and a good amount of water. So it's one of those things where you cut the butter into the flour with the salt mixture, and then you mix in your water little by little until you've got this kind of dry crumb, and then you press and fold it together, and then you chill it in the fridge. And this is one that I had in the freezer, so I kind of let it de-thaw so that it was nice and ready to use. So again, we're going to roll this out into our rectangle type shape so that we can cut it into place on top of our first layer here. But I will say, you can always, like, if you want to be a cheat, like in the sense of, I don't want to make my own pie crust, you can definitely go to the store and buy a pie crust and like get half the work kind of done there. But I do find butter pie crust is just so wonderful. It's nice and flaky and rich. It's one of those things where I use it on my pies. I use it on my pot pies, my pastries. It's just nice and delicious. And I always keep my pie crust without added sugar in it, because that way you have flexibility of what you're using it for. Okay, let's take a peek over here at our bacon. Okay, this is looking pretty good. So I'm going to grab just a small paper towel here on a plate, and we'll pop those out so that they can crisp up even more. And then I do have my oven preheated to 350, because that's what we're going to throw our Pop-Tarts in at.
Do you have a question? Do you ever take the scraps of dough and roll them out and sprinkle them with cinnamon sugar?
Yes, my husband actually talks about that. It's one of his like simple favorite things to do with the dough, like the leftover dough. And he actually, the other day, he was like, oh, I was going to ask you to make that, but I wasn't sure if people would understand what that was. And I was like, oh. It's always like a fun thing to do where, because when you make a pie or whatnot, you always have that little bits of dough. And most of the time people just kind of throw them away, but you can definitely roll them out, and you can do the cinnamon sugar or just sugar on it. And it's just kind of just a sweetened pie crust, which is delicious. Okay, I've got my bacon bits out so they can kind of rest up, and we're going to throw in our onions and let them saute. That way we'll be ready to throw in our potatoes here in just a little bit. Give them a nice stir. And they'll cook up. And this bacon grease is going to add just a lovely flavor to our soup, on top of having the bacon bits to give a little bit of crunch on it. But just think about how you have your loaded baked potatoes, where you put your sour cream and cheese and bacon bits and green onions. We're going to have pretty much all of that in there. Now, we're not going to use sour cream, but we're going to use some heavy cream. in our soup to get a nice cream, and as well as some freshly grated cheese. Now let's get this guy rolled out, get my arm workout for the day. And now you just don't want to leave it too thick on your crust, but don't make it paper thin either. You got to just find that happy medium for it. And then we can start to cut these up and see how they're looking. I feel like I've got my folding onto each other. Okay, let's start squaring this, or rectangling it off, I should say, because it's not a square. I'm actually going to flip it onto this part because we've gotten some creases in here. But this is the nice thing about using the parchment paper, is it allows you to work on it without it getting, too stuck onto it. Here we go. There we go. Just changing it is already giving me a little bit more give. Okay. Now I'm going to try to make this as even as our other ones. I've got to kind of eyeball it because, again, we want our layers to be about as nice. And I just do this Frankenstein where you put it back together, so you don't have to waste it, but you could do the little added bits on there. Here we go. So you just kind of put it there to keep it in the rectangle type form. And then you're just going to throw your parchment paper on it and just give it one good roll right over the top of it again. And that way it will kind of hold together. Okay. Give it a little push. Slide this over here. Let's give our onions a quick stir. There we go. Bacon and onions. Smells delicious. Now we're going to cut this into our little, how many did I cut over there? 6. I want to make sure I cut the right amount. You would think I wouldn't forget that. I just cut them, but I did. Okay, we're going to cut these into 6 sections and hopefully have them be as even as possible on there. And then before we flame on there, I'm going to brush them with my egg mixture here so that this is like that top layer of glue on it, and it's going to help them hold together. And then what we'll do is we'll bring that over here, and I'm just going to have to play guess to see which ones work the best. Okay, I'm going to find my big ones and make sure I've got all of these. This little one can go with that one. Oop, didn't cut it all the way through. You could also use like a pie crust, like a pizza crust cutter. I'm going to trim them off in just a second, but we're just going to layer them up right now. Here we go. And perfect. Now do not fear, we're going to trim these out and make them look gorgeous and press our ends together. But these are going to be our brown sugar and cinnamon Pop-Tarts. We've got our butter crust on both layers on the bottom, and filled with our cinnamon and brown sugar and flour mixture in between. So I'm just going to cut these as best I can to again make them more square. But you also don't have to do that, and you can just have, less uniform in your sides. But you shouldn't have to do a lot of this to make it work. This one I remember was not a perfect square. And now what we're going to do to seal them together is we're going to press this. But let's do a quick stir on our onions. We're getting this nice kind of golden caramelization on it, which is going to be beautiful. I'm going to turn this down to about a 2 while we do the rest of this. So here's the fun part. You're going to take your fork here and you're going to go around the edge of your little Pop-Tart to seal it together and to give it those just fun little edges here. I've got my, gotta hold this. It's a little too close to the edge there. Here we go. Just give it a little extra. And then we're gonna pop it as well. You need to make sure you've got it like broken through that layer to make sure that some steam can escape. Otherwise, what will happen is you'll have a Pop-Tart because it will puff up kind of like a balloon. And then if the heat doesn't escape out, then it will crack your crust. Here we go. One more. And you can kind of, when you're poking it in, you can feel it when it finally breaks through that layer. Here we go. Now this is the important because you've got to seal these sides together. So make sure you're going to push it down and it's going to kind of make them into one. But this is going to create that area where it can really steam inside. Okay. And then I have my oven preheated to 350, and these are just going to cook for, you know, like 25 minutes. Sometimes they take a little more or a little less. I find 25 is the perfect amount, but if your oven runs hot, then it's going to be closer to like 20. If it runs a little bit cooler, then closer to 30. So I always say 25 tends to work. And if your dough is thinner, if you roll it out thinner, they will, of course, cook faster. And if your dough is thicker, it will take a little bit longer. Let's get these holes poked in here. And then I got to reseal this guy right here. He's trying to escape. And then our last one out. And then just think at the very end, we're going to drizzle that, you know how Pop-Tarts always have that frosting on it? We're going to make a lovely brown sugar and cinnamon frosting to go over the top of them. Okay, let's go pop these guys in the oven. And that way we can work on everything else while these are baking, and then they'll be ready and perfect to come out. So again, my oven is set at 350. Because you don't want to cook these too high, or what you're going to end up doing is burning your pie crust. And then I'm going to set my timer. I'm going to do 24 minutes. That way I have a minute to get over here for that.
Do you have a question? What's inside the Pop-Tart?
So it is a brown sugar cinnamon filling, and it's, again, really simple. It's just brown sugar, cinnamon, and flour. And what will happen as it cooks and heats up, those will kind of melt together to make this almost like a caramel type filling, like a cinnamon caramely base to it. Because they'll also combine with like the fats in the pie crust. And then we're going to make a brown sugar glaze to go on top of it. So it's just a really delicious kind of brown sugary like pie, if you think about it. Okay, I've got 4 russet potatoes here. That little purple spot off. We're going to cube these up, and I'm going to make them, you know, not super small, but, you know, smaller so that they'll get tender a little bit quicker. That way we can puree them here in just a little bit. Now, when I puree it, I'm not going to put my whole pot of soup in my blender to puree because I like to reserve part of it because the chunk of the potatoes, I feel like I like the texture in it so that you're not just getting, you know, just a smooth soup. Let's get there. I've got a potato skin. There we go. Now I'm using russet potatoes because since we are pureeing it, I do like the texture that russet potatoes give since they're kind of a fluffier. So it'll be like a lighter, not a super sticky, potato soup. If you use like a Yukon Gold, that's a waxier potato. It holds its form well, which is good for a lot of soups. But when I'm making a pureed potato soup, I like to use the russets because they whip up really nicely and really combined with the broth well. Okay. And I always think about when I'm making this, because this soup should be about 4 servings. So 1 good sized potato per serving, because then I'll use about 4 cups of broth as well, and then a little bit of cream. There we go. Get all of this off, and you want to puree or peel them, because with russets that skin won't get tender, not like a Yukon Gold or like the red potatoes where those skins are more delicate and tender. Russet potatoes, if you keep that skin on, it's just going to get tough and chewy. So definitely give it a good peeling on it. Okay. Beautiful. We've got this nice caramelization occurring on our onions since they've got this lovely like brownish color from the bacon grease. And then we're going to start adding in our potatoes to give them a quick saute, because I do like to have them sauteed before I just throw in my broth. It gives them a better texture and flavor. Let's see. Let's get our first kind of batch in there. And now I'm going to turn it up to about a 6 now that I have my first set of potatoes going in here. So I'm cutting each one of my potatoes kind of into thirds and then in kind of half, and then I'll cut it up. That way I have just good smaller sized potato chunks, because I want some of those potatoes to be left over to be good bite-sized potatoes, but this will also allow it to tenderize and get nice and tender pretty quickly. They should be tender within, once we add the broth, like within the 10 minutes of that. Here we go. And then we'll work on our roast beef and cheddar melts. Last night I baked up a fresh loaf of our kind of a honey whole wheat loaf, sourdough loaf. Now I call this my Frankenstein loaf because I had no intention to do a wheat loaf when I did it, but as I was going, I ran out of flour. And so I was like, okay, I almost had it halfway to do it, and I wasn't about to throw it out and just skip it. So I ended up using a little bit of cake flour to make the white flour part up to it, and then we have whole wheat in it. So it was like 3 types of flour, but it got a beautiful peak on it, and it's delicious. So it's going to make some great sandwiches.
Quick side note, I believe it's pronounced Frankenstein.
Oh, Frankenstein. I guess I should say Frankenstein's monster and not him. It's a common most people call Frankenstein is the scientist who created the monster. So let's wash my hands. Let's give these a good little stir up here and kind of let them saute in that bacon grease with those onions. Was that good bacon bits? My bacon's disappearing. I might have to move my plate farther away from the cameraman so that there is bacon left over, because he would just eat all of the bacon and not leave any for the soup. Okay, let's get these all coated here. So make sure you always want to stir them around and coat them with whatever that oil and grease is, because potatoes are kind of like, sponges, and they're going to soak up all of that. Okay, I'm going to turn that up. We're going to let that start to kind of crisp up for it. I can actually start working on grating my cheese for this. I'm going to just wipe the potato starch off my knife here. Now, I'm going to grate this because when you buy like already grated cheese from the store, it has an anti-caking agent on it, which helps prevent it from melting and sticking to other cheeses. But when you are doing a soup where you want the cheese to melt and create a whole fluid base to your soup, that caking agent, the anti-caking agent on it, can kind of mess with the texture of your soup and allowing it to kind of form a nice kind of cheesy broth. So I'm going to just use some regular block cheese and grate it myself. And we'll add this in there, but I just want to get this done and out of the way. And I'm just using a sharp cheddar because, you know, on a loaded baked potato, you typically get cheddar cheese as your cheese of choice. And I am just a lover of cheddar cheese. I'm a lover of all cheeses except American. Here we go. So I've got a first kind of bit there, but let's give this, I can hear it turning to crisp up. So I'm going to give this a nice stir. And in just a second, we're going to add our broth in here. But I do like these potatoes to get a little bit of a nice saute on them first. Okay. And, you know, I think we've gotten so used to the convenience of buying shredded cheese that it really isn't hard to just shred it yourself. You know, it takes maybe like a minute of extra time, but it does make a good difference in your texture of your soup. Same thing with mac and cheese. There we go. Don't think we're going to need that much more. So we'll have a little spare block. I'm not giving you the whole block. The cameraman needs his payment. There we go. He wants the whole block, but he's not getting the whole block. Okay. These are starting to crisp up nicely, getting a little bit of a crispy edge on it. So let's sprinkle in a little bit of flavoring before we add in our broth. So I'm just going to do a good shake over of garlic salt. We don't need too much, like a teaspoon, because we are going to be using chicken bouillon, which will give us a nice little flavor there. And then we're going to put in some paprika, smoked paprika, and we're going to do about a teaspoon or so. Again, you don't need a whole lot, just enough to give a little bit of a subtle flavor. And then my black pepper. We're going to do about a half a teaspoon of black pepper. Now I'm going to coat my potatoes all up with this, and then we're going to pour in our broth, which I'm going to use water and then chicken bouillon for this. But I want to make sure our potatoes get kind of coated in these spices so that they'll help seep into it, and it's also going to help flavor up our base. Here we go. So now I've got 4 cups of water. You can also use 4 cups of chicken broth. I'm going to pour in about 1 cup right now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of deglaze the bottom of my pan, which means I'm going to take my spatula here and scrape off any little of those tasty bits that might have stuck to the bottom of your pan. I like to do it when I just have a little bit of liquid in there. It allows things to kind of soak up and create a more like a married broth, I should say, kind of comes together. Again, we'll add a little bit more, making sure to try to get all of those little tasty bits off the bottom here.
Oh, you have a question? Does it matter what type of potato you use?
For this soup, I prefer to use russet because it is a lighter, fluffier potato, and we're going to be pureeing it. Yukon Gold potatoes are a bit more waxy, which means they keep their form, which is really great for like a beef and potato soup where you want that potato to stay in its form. But for this soup, we're going to be pureeing the majority of the potatoes. And so I do want them to kind of get into a nice kind of like a bisque-like texture. So I find that russet works best for this because the other ones are a bit more waxy and they give you a stickier feel to it. Let me get a spoon. We're going to add in a scooping tablespoon of our chicken bouillon. And this is going to give us a nice subtle chicken flavor to it as well, but the saltiness. And just a big heaping spoonful. And I do prefer to use, unless I've made my own broth, I prefer to use like bouillon over just the pre-bought chicken broth because I find the chicken broth that is at the store is very, very bland. And this you can get more of that kind of flavor in it with less liquid. Okay, let's taste and see how it is. Good. Now, this broth should be stronger in flavor than what your end product is because we are going to be whipping our potatoes with it. And so that's going to dull it out. So at this time, make it stronger than what your end product is so that it will end at the right flavor. Okay, let's get these little scraps to the side over here. And let's get working on our grilled cheese, or our cheddar melt, our roast beef and cheddar melt. And this is, we baked this up last night. So this was my Frankenstein loaf, where I put like so many different flours in it to get here. But again, it's a nice kind of honey whole wheat loaf. Very mild on the honey part, but I like to add a little bit of honey with my whole wheat because it helps it kind of give it that rising process. Give it a little thing because whole wheat flour is denser and thicker than regular like flour. So it's a little bit heavier. So putting a little bit of honey gives it a little extra bounce. We're going to cut our slices here. But again, we got such a beautiful crumb on this loaf. And it is funny. I said, I would not ever recommend to use cake flour because it's so finely ground and it has a lower protein content than all-purpose and bread flour. But I had no other flour that I could use, and I didn't want to use even more whole wheat flour because then it would be too dense in there. And I was wondering, and it actually seemed to work out great. Here we go. So I've got, and these are going to be good sized sandwiches. This is going to make 4 sandwiches here because we'll cut them in half because this slice of bread is like the size of my face. And we're going to start by just putting a little bit of butter on just one side of our bread because that's the side that's going to be touching the skillet. And we want it to kind of get nice and crispy edges. I'll do this with the other side. Let me dig them out of those little bubble pockets. Do it like this. And this is how we want to lay it. I always got to make sure, it's like a puzzle, make sure that I've buttered the right size so that my peak matches my other peak, because if I had done it that way, they would be crisscrossing. Okay, so we got those on. I'm going to start turning this on like a 6. We'll turn it down lower, but that's going to start heating up that bread to get it going. And for this, we're keeping it really simple. I'm going to use some London broil roast beef, sandwich meat, some cheddar cheese, and red onions. And that's really all I'm going to do for things because I feel like roast beef already has a good seasoning to it, and I don't want to jazz it up too much. Okay, let's start assembling these. Now with your cheese, just make sure you don't have it going past your crust. So always just break off little edges because what will happen is that will melt down and burn on your skillet, and then you'll have some burnt cheese on your skillet, which won't be good. Here we go. And let's get this other guy. Now, my little rule of thumb when I'm making grilled cheeses is I sandwich the meat between the cheeses. And that way you're going to get that delicious cheese pull and cheese bite on it. And when I'm doing a melt, I don't put as much sandwich meat on it as if I were doing a cold sandwich, because too much sandwich meat is going to cause your grilled cheese to stay cold and never get a good melt on it. I'm going to turn. I've got a rolling boil over here. I'm going to give this a nice stir. Here we go. We'll let that kind of get those potatoes nice and tender. Turn it down to low. So I'm going to get out my roast beef here. We're going to layer it on. Make sure, don't just pull out, make sure you break your pieces of meat apart so that it's not just like it lets a little air in between it and it doesn't get it super thick. Here we go. Slide this on. I also find, and I'm really picky about the roast beef that I get. Sometimes I find that you can buy a roast beef at the store and it's really, really bland. So you're going to have to hunt until you find a brand that you like or whatnot, on there. Okay, we're going to use up. I just have a little bit left. So we're going to use all of this up because this is, 8 ounces of roast beef to make 4 sandwiches. So a good amount, but not too much. And now we're going to finish off with our second layer of cheese. And again, just make sure you kind of just peel off some of those edges so that you don't get it melting onto your skillet. So when we cut this in half, each sandwich will have like 2 slices of cheese on it and about 2 ounces of meat. Here we go. And I think that big one and there. We'll let it do. Again, I'm having my skillet heat up now on about a 6. And what I like to do is kind of the double flip. Before I forget, let's tuck these red onions in. Did that the other day too. We're just going to cut a little bit of thin slivers of red onions here. I always have just this little bit of a red onion because red onion's not great for cooking with. Once you start heating it up and sauteing it, it loses its flavor. And so it's much better eaten raw. And so I always have it for my salads, sandwiches, and dips, but I don't ever use it for cooking. So 1 red onion will last me a good amount of time. Let me get it right underneath. We'll slide it up, tuck it underneath that cheese. And you don't need a whole lot, just enough to get a little bit of that onion flavor and a little bit of a crunch. There we go. Perfect. Okay, we're done with this section. So I'm going to slide this out and we'll give our soup a little bit of a stir here. And we're going to start working on our glaze for our Pop-Tarts. Okay, so I've got, looks like I got a little bit of a potato in there from peeling. We're got a little bit of butter here. I'm going to use about a 1/4 cup of butter to make my glaze, which is a 1/2 a stick. Let me I'll grab a spoon. And this is because we want to have a good amount of glaze to go on each one because that's going to really add that pop of flavor. So I'm going to turn my back burner on. We're going to start melting it. I have it room temperature, so it should melt up pretty fast. And then I'm going to use a 1/2 cup of brown sugar with this. And we're going to melt it together to give it kind of like until that grit is gone in our brown sugar.
Hey, you have a question. If you only use your red onion occasionally, how do you store it between uses?
So I just wrap it up in a paper towel and I keep it in my crisper drawer, my veggie crisper drawer. And that really keeps it from getting, moldy and whatnot. And then a lot of times, that way I can have it and slice it as we go. And then I wrap it right back up. Okay, let's give this a quick stir. Once it started melting, we'll add in our cinnamon. And then to finish off this glaze, once we've made that, is we just add in some cream and then our powdered sugar until we have the right kind of consistency to drizzle over. But this is the key part because you really need to get that grit out of the brown sugar because you don't want a crunchy, gritty glaze. Let's give this a quick stir. And I'm going to check my tenderness of my potatoes here because they'll get tender pretty quickly. So I'm just going to fish out a big one and see. I'll know that they're ready is when I can kind of put my fork all the way through one. Here we go. So we're getting there, almost about halfway. These need a few more minutes, which is perfect timing because I've got some green onions to prep up and we'll flip our grilled cheese and make the rest of this. We're getting down to our final kind of countdown bit. Okay. So just like with a loaded baked potato, we've got our green onions that we're going to put on. We'll save this. Some of it is going to go in a little bit, and some will go for the very end because kind of a garnish type thing. I'm going to cut off these very bottom white tips, and then the lighter part, the white to the pale green, I'm actually going to throw in now because that part of the green onion needs a little time to cook to let off a little bit of that astringent flavor, while the greener parts, you want to add that at the very end almost as the garnish so that it doesn't wilt and lose a little bit of things. I missed that completely. There we go. Boop. And that's why we use silicone to cook with. And perfect. Okay, looks like we're getting this nice and melted. We don't want to cook this brown sugar so long that it's going to, I'm getting a little toasty here. Okay, that one got definitely a little bit more toasty. I must have forgotten about it. That is A-okay. Luckily, it's not too bad. Let me turn this down. Okay, slide this over here. I always forget when I have this burner on over there, I got to be a little bit more careful because it puts that residual heat. But luckily, it's a whole wheat bread, so it's a little bit ring. But that side will only toast it up once. My other sides, I'll let them get to 2 on it. But you see how they were on the same thing, but this one, because it's close to this burner, always heats up a little bit more. And we got a little bit of a ooze happening here. 'Tis the life. I always say you can be a great chef and you're still going to make mistakes. I always love that episode. It's like, I don't know if it was an episode or whatnot, but Gordon Ramsay made shepherd's pie with his mom, and they had a little bit of a competition with each other. And hers turned out perfect and his did not. And I always just see them like, nobody, even the best chefs are not infallible. Okay, we've got our brown sugar kind of nice and oozy melted here. We don't want to cook it too long to where it turns into a candy, but you want to cook it to where you've got that grit is gone. Now, I always recommend is taking it out of the hot pan that we have. This is going to allow it to cool down a little bit faster and makes our glaze work a little bit together. Let's go grab our Poptarts out of the oven here. And let's get this down. We'll get those flipping in just a second. Okay. Look at those gorgeous flaky layers. I always say my butter crust has just got this beautiful layers to it. Oh, they are looking gorgeous. So when I'm making my butter crust, just like with my biscuits and everything, it is the press and fold technique where you are pressing that crumb together to get it. But just look at all of the layers in the butter crust and just how gorgeous that is. That is just kind of the beautiful part of using a homemade crust, because you're not going to get that with store-bought crust. Okay, let's finish up our glaze here. Let's check on these guys. We got a little bit of a cheese melt together. Almost took them together. Beautiful. We're getting this lovely kind of golden brown. Beautiful. We're going to let that stay there because I don't want to toast that side too much for it. But we'll flip it in just a second. Okay, let's give this a good stir. And then I'm going to get my cream and we're going to whip up and make our glaze here. So we've got our butter here. So this is a 1/4 cup of butter with a 1/2 cup of brown sugar. We're going to add in about 2 to 3 tablespoons. I'm going to just eyeball it, but you could definitely measure it out. And then we're going to add in about, between 1 and 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. Again, I'm going to just eyeball it to where I see it. You can go heavier if you want more or lighter with less. You could also switch it out for pumpkin pie spice if you want a little bit more of a festive flavor to it. Okay. So this is going to be we're going to mix powdered sugar into this, but we want to mix this together, and then we'll add enough powdered sugar to get the right consistency. But as you see, we're going to get this just lovely, delicious flavor to it. The cream is going to add a richness to our frosting base to it, our glaze, while the powdered sugar will make it spreadable. Where's my powdered sugar? Oh, I must have not grabbed it, but I'll grab that in 1 second. But let me check my potatoes here because I think we're about ready to puree these up. Yep. Okay, I'm going to grab my powdered sugar out of my pantry real quick. But let me give this a quick stir. And I'm going to move that one slightly there. Okay. I'm going to get this. Okay. Got my powdered sugar for this. Let's get our soup pureed. That way we can have the kind of the next thickening base for it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to puree it right now, but I'm not going to add in my cream. I'll do that afterwards because that will allow us to figure out the exact kind of creaminess if you want it. I feel like when you try to puree it, when you add the cream in now and try to puree it, you don't get the right kind of the consistency that you want. Let me grab a ladle here. And we're going to ladle in. Now, I want to leave some of my potatoes and my broth on there because I don't want to put it all in because, again, I want that texture of those chunks of potatoes for our soup. So I'm just reserving, I'm going to take about half of it. And that's going to give me a thick kind of biscuity texture to it. I always miss a little bit. There we go. So you can see I've taken about 2/3 of it and I've left about 1/3 for it. And now what we're going to do is we're going to puree this up using our blender. You could also use an immersion blender for this if you wanted to. You just have to be careful not to blend all of them. I'm going to use my hot soup setting on my Vitamix. And we're going to blend it and then it will speed up. Once it gets to like a thing, we'll lift it up and it'll go fast now. I'm going to try to time it. I'm not there. There we go. I always try to time it. It's like the green light when you're like, ah. So here we've got our nice thick base to it. It's going to be rich and creamy. And it's going to be a little bit thicker than your end product because we're going to be adding in our cream and we're mixing this back in with our broth for this. Let me grab my spatula. And again, this is why you want to use a russet potato because a russet potato is going to give you a really smooth but not super thick starchy base to it. Just look at that. We've got our, see, we've got this lovely like rich and thickness to it. And we haven't even added in our cream to make this extra creamy texture to it. Okay, let's add in, my cream's hiding over here. Let me check on these real quick. They're going great. Beautiful. So let me turn this down nice and low for this. And we're going to add in our cream here. We need about 1/2 cup of cream.
You have a question? What's in the soup other than potatoes, and is the recipe posted?
So in our soup right now, we have onions, paprika, chicken broth, potatoes, some little bit of our green onions, and some black pepper. And then we will add the recipe. What I will do is we upload all of our videos to the link on our page, so you can always recreate the recipes from there. Okay. Delicious. Now with our cheese, because we're almost done here, we're not going to add in all of our cheese at one time. We're going to save, we're going to put in half. So about 2/3 of a cup in now to give it that nice cheesy bit thing. And then the rest is going to be for drizzling over the top of it. Here we go. So we're going to let that, and again, we have it simmering on low. We'll have it right there. We've got our grilled cheese. I'm going to actually turn them off now because we are at that kind of final stage. Let's finish up making our glaze here. So we're going to add in, I'm going to start with about a half a cup. I'm going to actually set this to the side and we're going to start whisking it. And so I put in a half a cup and we go little by little until we get the texture that we want with our glaze. So you want it to be thick, that we can drizzle, like we're really going to spoon it over it. You don't want it to be too thin or it's going to run right off. We'll do a little bit thicker here. So I'm going to add up to about a cup here. So I'm going to add another fourth longer, or a little bit more. And you don't want it to be where you have to spread it. You want it to be able to kind of drizzle it and then it will kind of spread out. Beautiful. I think that's right. You see how we've got this slow drizzle? Perfect. Okay. Now I'm going to just use this spoon. We'll mix that, what's in there, because I want to be able to spoon it on for our thing. There we go. And now we're going to spoon this over our Poptarts here. So we're just going to take a good spoonful. And you want that a good amount on it because you want it to add in that things. And I like to do it not when they're piping hot, but after a few minutes after they've come out of the oven so that they're still warm, that it's going to get that good melt over it. But you don't want it to be so hot that it's going to just completely run off the top of it. Here we go. And add a little bit more on that guy. Beautiful. And again, I love when my crust gets all those flaky layers on it. And that's just my butter pie crust. There we go. And there we go. Spread it out. Beautiful. Okay, let's finish off with the rest of this. Get my bacon bits out of here and get these chopped up here. Okay, so I'm just going to slice up my green onions. We'll throw some of it into our soup right now. And then, of course, we're going to leave some to garnish on our top of our little bowl. Here we go. So I'm going to take about a handful, so half of them, which is about a fourth of a cup. And we're going to mix this right into our soup here. Beautiful. And again, you can see we've got some lovely chunks of potatoes still in there. So you've got that thick, creamy bisque, but with the lovely thing. Now we guys are ready to serve up our lunch today. Do my little cauldron. And let me grab my spatula right here. Beautiful, nice, gorgeous grilled cheese. And I'm going to cut this guy in half because this is a huge sandwich. There we go. So look at that beautiful, this is our cheddar and roast beef melt on our homemade sourdough, whole wheat sourdough bread. I'm going to add it right there. Well, it's too much to put on there. And then we have our delicious homemade creamy loaded baked potato soup. This has got chock full of our delicious potatoes, cream, a little bit of cheddar cheese, green onions, yellow onions, and then we're going to top it with our bacon bits that we sauteed up because that's what we fried our vegetables in, a little bit of our cheddar cheese, a sprinkle of our green onions, and then of course we will have our homemade Pop-Tarts for dessert. Again, look at these gorgeous layers on there with our brown sugar glaze on top, and it has that cinnamon sugar cinnamon brown sugar filling in the middle on our butter crust. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to that link, search for what we made, and you can watch and cook along with us again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. So if you're interested in what pans, pots, knives, and what we use, we have it all there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe.